Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov. You can get any updates to our forecast there or check out any watches, warnings, advisories that we may have out at the time. You can also call our weather info line 1-800-472-0391, get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can follow us both on Facebook and on Twitter. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at the warnings that we do have out. Starting off in the west, we have an advisory out for freezing rain. That is for the Yukon Delta and for St. Lawrence Island. That is in effect from midnight tonight until noon tomorrow. Then if we take a look out over the southeast part of the state, for downtown Juneau and the Douglas vicinity, we have a high wind watch, and that is out until or from Wednesday afternoon until Thursday evening. Again, you can check our website for additional details on all of those products. Switching it up a little bit, taking a look at Anchorage. If you're in this area, you notice that we don't have a whole lot of snow on the ground, although there are some sprinkles out there right now, so we are seeing a little bit of trace of snow on the ground in some places. But for Thanksgiving Day, we have since 1953, we have data for those years, and in that time, we've had 3 times where we've had 0 snow on the ground. That is 1984, 2000, and 2002. With less than 1 inch of snow, that's happened 9 times, and 10 additional times at 1 inch. And then an average snow depth for Thanksgiving Day is 5.4 inches. But again, right now, we're not seeing a whole lot in the Anchorage area. Taking a look at our satellite imagery. For mainland Alaska, not a whole lot of high clouds, but we do have some lower clouds moving through. You can see especially out over the interior, bringing some snow in those areas, and some showers moving through the south central as well. Taking a look now at the Panhandle as we watch this loop again. We do have some of these isolated showers out over the Gulf moving in over places in the Panhandle, bringing some isolated showers to those areas as well. Moving out over the western part of the state, we have a low way out here to the west of the Shemya area, and that is bringing in some rain showers and some snow to areas in the western Aleutian Islands. And then watching this loop one more time, staying out west, we have a low that is pushing up from the south, bringing in some rain to areas throughout the Aleutian Islands and into the Bering Sea as well. That takes us to our weather for today. We have that one frontal system moving up, bringing in some rain from the south, that warm southerly flow, getting all the way up to the Pribilofs area, bringing in some fog with that as well, and then rain again out by the western Aleutian Islands. As we move further to the east in the Bristol Bay area, some rain as we get to the northern locations there. And then into the YK Delta, we have the rain and snow mixture with a chance of some light freezing rain in some of the more southern locations, with some more snow further to the north and some fog mixed in with that. Then along the Tin City area, we do have some snow up there, and then along the Arctic coast and the Dead Horse area, seeing some light flurries up there as well. Down throughout the interior with those showers moving through, we have some snow in many locations. And then as we move into the south central, some isolated snow showers there with some of the really warmer locations starting to see that melt a little bit, starting to become a little bit of rain. And then as we move down into the Panhandle area, isolated rain showers there. Moving into the overnight hours, some of that rain becoming a little bit more widespread in the Panhandle and cooling off as we get closer to the Petersburg and Juneau areas, starting to mix more with snow there. Snow showers for the Yakutat area. Along the Gulf Coast, not a whole lot of activity, but in the Cook Inlet area, we are going to see some fog developing overnight and some isolated showers further to the north of Talkeetna and Alaska ranges. And then in eastern parts of the interior, expecting to see some snow up there, but along the Brooks Range and Arctic coast, high pressure keeping the precipitation off to the south. Down in the southern parts of the Seward Peninsula, going to see some snow showers there, and that's going to change over to rain and some freezing rain for the Yukon Delta that we saw, and some of that going to push up overnight into the St. Lawrence Island area. And then we have down in the lower parts of the YK Delta and in the Bristol Bay area, some rain down there with some fog developing around Bristol Bay, and then rain throughout the Aleutian Islands and Bering Sea, getting a little bit colder in the western Aleutian Islands, seeing some snow out there. As we look into Wednesday, that low pressure moving up further to the north, bringing in more rain from the south. Continuing to see the colder temperatures out over the western Aleutian Islands, expecting to see a mix of precipitation there. Fog still lingering around the morning hours around Bristol Bay with some snow showers further inland and snow all the way up along the Arctic coast. But until noon, we are going to see the potential for some freezing rain in the Yukon Delta area. And those snow showers are going to continue up the coastline into the Point Hope area. But we're still going to see high pressure dominating the Arctic coastline, keeping the majority of the precipitation off into the west. Down into the south central area, some lingering morning fog along the Cook Inlet area extending up into the Anchorage area as well. And then down in the Panhandle, we are going to see some fog developing overnight there as well in Wednesday. And then we can see as we move into Thursday with this high pressure moving further to the south, tighter pressure gradient there. So we are going to see those stronger winds in the southeast, but not a whole lot of precipitation there. Moving out over mainland Alaska, some fog developing again in the morning hours for the Cook Inlet area, but all throughout much of the interior and Arctic coast, not going to see a whole lot of precipitation on Thursday. And down the west coast of the state in the Kotzebue Sound area, we are going to see in the northern parts some snow showers up there. And then south of the Seward Peninsula, snow from St. Lawrence Island down into the YK Delta. And then starting to change over to rain as we get into the Bristol Bay area, and then snow showers behind our frontal system, or rain showers behind our frontal system all throughout the Aleutian Islands and Bering Sea. Taking a look at our temperatures as of 2 p.m. this afternoon, we have in the 40s throughout much of the Panhandle. Colder there at Skagway, 34 degrees, 37 for Yakutat. Taking us into the south central part of the state, we have temperatures in the 30s for the most part. Glen Allen, colder there, 5 degrees as of this afternoon. Taking us into the interior part, we do have a lot of temperatures in the teens there. A little bit colder as we get further to the north, -2 through the pass, -2 for Arctic Village as well. And then along the Arctic coastline, a little bit warmer. Deadhorse and Kaktovik going to see 3 degrees there. Below zero as we get from Barrow to the west. Point Hope, however, 18 degrees this afternoon, a little bit warmer there. Down in the Kotzebue Sound area, all below zero with Kotzebue at -1. And then Nome sitting at 15 degrees with other temperatures around Norton Sound in the teens there. Taking us down into the southwestern part of the state, temperatures in the 30s for the Kuskokwim Delta, and then down in Bristol Bay, we have temperatures in the 30s. Down to as low as the upper 20s there. Dillingham at 28 degrees. Down in the Alaska Peninsula in the lower 40s there with Cold Bay at 42 degrees. Dutch Harbor 44 degrees. And that takes us into the central and western Aleutian Islands, dropping down into the 30s with Adak down to 36 degrees. And St. Paul at 43 this afternoon. For lows tonight, staying down in the 30s along the Aleutian Islands, down to 37 for St. Paul. Temperatures in the Alaska Peninsula a little bit warmer there. As high for a low tonight at 40 degrees for Cold Bay. Sandpoint a little bit colder, 38 degrees there. Down in the 20s around Bristol Bay, down in the 20s in the YK Delta as well. Seward Peninsula down a little bit lower there into the mid-teens. And as we move up into the Kotzebue Sound area, it's staying down below zero for many of the locations. Continuing along the Arctic coast as well, Deadhorse dropping down to -13 degrees. We do have Arctic Village dropping all the way down to -22 tonight, lowest in the state expected. In the interior, we are going to see temperatures below zero there as well. And then a little bit warmer in the south central into the teens for northern locations along the coast, only dropping down to the 20s with Cordova only getting down to 30 degrees tonight. Then down in the Panhandle into the 30s for most locations, colder as we get further to the north with Skagway getting down to 25 for a low tonight. For tomorrow, temperatures rising back up into the 30s, colder once again further to the north. And then as we move into the south central, temperatures getting up into the mid-30s there. In the interior, getting warmer, but only getting up into the single digits, with some of the locations further to the north, only getting up into below zero there. -18 expected high temperature for Arctic Village tomorrow, with that high pressure sitting overhead, not allowing for a lot of warmer air to get into that area. Along the Arctic coastline, right around zero for most locations, with Barrow expected to get up to 0 degrees tomorrow. Then down in the Kotzebue Sound area into the teens for most locations, warmer along the coastline. Point Hope getting up to 23 degrees tomorrow. Then down in the Norton Sound area, getting up into the 30s along the coastline with warmer temperatures along that western coast. and down into the YK Delta, getting right around 30 degrees. Some places getting a little bit higher. Macoriac up to 39 degrees tomorrow. Bristol Bay Area up into the 30s, and then into the 40s all along the Aleutian Islands, with the exception of Shimmy out there, only getting up to 38 degrees, with St. Paul getting up to 42 degrees for a high tomorrow. Switching it up, looking at our aviation forecast, with all those lows moving throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we are seeing some widespread MVFR conditions out there with some IFR conditions as those different fronts and troughs pass through, especially along the coast. A lot of IFR conditions extending all the way up the west coast, and MVFR conditions riding along the Arctic coastline. As we look out over the eastern parts of the Alaska Range, we are going to see some MVFR conditions in the morning, and then down in the Panhandle and the southern parts, we are going to see some MVFR conditions there as well. Taking a look now at our passes, Anaktuvik should be VFR for tomorrow, as well as Adigan Pass, Lake Clark, and Merrill, all expected to be VFR, as is Rainy Pass, Windy Pass. And as we move into Isabel Pass, going to start off MVFR but improve throughout the day, as is Mentasta Pass. And then we have VFR conditions expected for Tanita and Portage. And then Chilkoot and White both expected to be VFR for tomorrow. Taking a look now at our freezing level, we can see that we have some warmer air moving into places in the southern Panhandle, but not expected to get much further than that. We have our surface freezing line going through central parts and then riding along the northern Gulf Coast, with some all below freezing temperatures all throughout much of mainland Alaska, and then some warmer air again with those fronts coming up from the south, extending into places of the central and eastern Bering Sea. Taking a look at our icing for tomorrow, way out west from the central Aleutians out through the western Aleutian Islands, between 7,000 and 10,000 feet there. From the Norton Sound area extending off over northeastern Russia, above 9,000 feet there. And then way out there over the northern part of the Panhandle, between 2,000 and 5,000 feet. Taking a look at our jet stream now, the main part of the jet out to our south at 150 knots, but as we look over mainland Alaska, we have a branch of the jet going out over our high pressure, about 85 knots, becoming northwesterly. However, as it's over the Bering Sea, coming in about 110 knots out of the south, moving through the Bering and turning to become that northwesterly flow out over mainland Alaska. Stronger parts of the jet coming in out of the westerly direction, 125 knots there, well south of the Aleutians, however. And then dropping us down to 9,000 feet, our lows way out west, circulation around those out of a northerly direction up to as high as 30 knots there, but really picking up as we get over the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, 50 to 60 knots out of the south, dropping down to 40 knots, but still pretty strong as we get closer to St. Lawrence Island there, around 60 knots out of a southerly direction in that location. Dropping down to 35 knots as we move out over the western part of the state, and then really diminishing as we get over the northern locations, only around 10 knots there. And out over mainland Alaska out of a northwesterly direction, 10 to 15 knots. Panhandle only getting a little bit higher there, out around 20 knots. Then for tomorrow at 3,000 feet, we have northerly flow around 15 knots throughout much of the Panhandle. Pretty light flow out over mainland Alaska, only around 10 knots, variable underneath the high pressure. And then out over the west coast of the state, southerly flow, getting anywhere from 20 knots to 40 knots as we move a little bit off the coastline. As we get out over the Bering, out of the south, 50 to 55 knots, and right around our low pressure system and the central Aleutian Islands out of a southerly direction up to as high as 65 knots there. Then northwesterly flow out over the western Aleutian Islands up to as high as 40 knots. Taking a look at our turbulence, as would be expected, our turbulence is out with our stronger winds all throughout the Aleutian Islands into parts of the peninsula, and we do have that below 4,000 feet tomorrow, and right along the YK Delta coast, extending up towards St. Lawrence Island, below 4,000 feet, moderate turbulence expected there for tomorrow. If you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms, why they occurred. The distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region, the rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not, didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Oh, okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense and what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses, are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. One of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you're using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
Welcome back. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. Around the YK Delta area, we do have rapidly growing ice in those locations due to some of the colder temps there. Then we have some of the ice moving in from the northeast, pushing out, closing in the area north of the Bering Sea, but not quite there yet. As you can see, a lot of open water still pushing up north of the Point Hope area. Now in the southeast for our winds and waves, we have winds out of the south or northeasterly direction, anywhere from 15 to 20 knots. Higher as we get closer towards Yakutat there, around 30 knots. Inside waters, northerly direction, 30 knots near Skagway, and then as we move down, around 20 to 25 knots, still out of primarily a northerly direction, with some higher gusts north of Petersburg. And then on Thursday, we do have winds still out of a primarily northerly direction, 35 to 40 knots, continuing those gusts north of Petersburg. And as we look out into the eastern parts of the Gulf, northeasterly flow, 30 to 35 knots most locations, higher gusts as we get further to the north there out of Disenchantment Bay as well. And taking a look now in the south central, northerly flow here, and then we have 15 to 20 knots out in the Gulf, with 10 to 25 knots, strongest to the west of the Barren Islands, down around 15 knots in Shelikof Strait, seas around 4 or 5 feet in most locations. And then on Thursday, we have variable flow out in most of the Gulf, becoming north or southwesterly 15 knots on the eastern side of Kodiak Island, and northeasterly flow 10 to 15 knots throughout much of Cook Inlet, down west of the Barren Islands, and southeasterly flow for Shelikof Strait, 15 knots there. Seas only getting up to as high as 9 feet on the southeastern side of Kodiak Island. That takes us into the Alaska Peninsula, southeasterly flow, pretty light, and as we get further off to the east, only around 10 knots there, but getting higher as we get further to the west, 25 to 35 knots, strongest north of Cold Bay, with the seas highest south of Cold Bay there, 13 feet, only around 4 feet as we get closer to the Bristol Bay area. And then on Thursday, southerly flow, 20 to 25 knots, getting up to as high as 30 knots north of Cold Bay, and seas 11 to 15 feet on the Pacific side, 4 to 9 feet on the Bering side. For the Aleutian Islands, southerly flow 30 to 45 knots, weakest as we get further off to the east, getting stronger as we move out to the west. Seas as high as 25 feet on the Pacific side. As we move out towards the western Aleutian Islands, northwesterly flow 30 knots there, becoming easterly as we get into the central Aleutian Islands, 40 knots there. Then on Thursday, switching out, becoming westerly flow, 40 knots, all out west, and then becoming southwesterly as we get further off to the east, 25 to 30 knots there, with seas up to as high as 21 feet on the Pacific side. Along the west coast of the state, southeasterly flow, 30 to 40 knots most locations, stronger near the Pribilos, 45 knots there, with some freezing spray up by the Bering Strait. And then on Thursday, southeasterly flow continuing, 30 to 35 knots, seeing that freezing spray up there by the Bering Strait again. And then near the Pribilos, we have southerly flow around 40 knots there, with seas as high as 18 feet, dropping off as we get closer to the coastline. Then along the Arctic coast, easterly flow 10 to 15 knots, becoming stronger as we get out towards the west. Easterly flow up to as high as 25 knots there, with freezing spray in the ice-free waters and seas as high as 6 feet on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, becoming southeasterly, 20 to 30 knots, strongest again as we get closer towards the Bering Strait area. Still seeing some freezing spray in the ice-free waters, with seas as high as 6 to 7 feet. As we look along the Arctic coastline, becoming weaker as we get further off towards the east, with easterly flow 15 knots there. Quick recap out over the state. In the interior, you're going to see some snow showers throughout the night, some isolated snow showers in the south central as well, with some fog developing around Cook Inlet. We have some rain mixing with snows to get further to the north in the Panhandle. And then as we look out over the west coast of the state, we have some rain in the Bristol Bay area becoming mixed with rain, especially after midnight. We are going to see some freezing rain in the Yukon Delta, and some of that is going to push up towards St. Lawrence Island as well. Then throughout the Aleutians and Bering, we have some rain out there with some colder temperatures for the western Aleutian Islands, mixing that with snow. As we move into Wednesday, we are going to see more southerly flow coming in, warm air, rain throughout the area, mixed with snow towards the western Aleutian Islands, and snow all along the west coast, with the exception of some freezing rain in the morning hours in the Yukon Delta and along the St. Lawrence Island area. High pressure dominating most of mainland Alaska, however, keeping the precipitation off to the west. And with Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.